my fiance's father is forcing me to marry my fiance's twin brother. His marriage paid the price instead. My fiance Oliver and his twin brother Blake couldn't be more different. Oliver was kind, worked as a physical therapist, and treated me like an equal partner. Blake was 32 and still lived in his parents' basement, had been fired from 6 jobs for harassment, and spent his time making crude comments about every woman he met. When Oliver proposed after 3 years together, I was thrilled until his father, Robert, pulled me aside at our engagement party and said I was making a mistake choosing the wrong brother. He actually said those words to my face while Oliver was across the room, showing his mom the ring. Robert said Blake had more potential, just needed the right woman to fix him, and that I could be that woman. I laughed, thinking it was a weird joke, but Robert was serious. He said Oliver was too soft, too boring, that Blake had the real personality in the family. Blake, who had been arrested twice for bar fights. Blake, who'd been banned from Oliver's gym for taking photos of women without permission. Blake, who'd asked me at our first meeting if I had prettier friends. Robert started his campaign immediately. Every family dinner, he'd seat me next to Blake instead of Oliver. When I'd move, he'd make a scene about the seating chart being intentional for conversation flow. Blake would spend the meal making gross comments about my body, while Robert laughed and said Blake was just confident. Oliver would tell his dad to stop, but Robert would say Oliver needed to learn to take a joke. For Oliver's birthday, Robert organized a surprise party but told me the wrong time, so I arrived 2 hours late. When I got there, Blake was sitting in my spot next to Oliver, wearing my gift on his wrist, the watch I'd bought that Robert had apparently taken from my car and given to Blake to present. Robert told everyone Blake had picked it out and wasn't that thoughtful. Oliver knew immediately something was wrong, but Robert had already taken photos for the family album. The worst was when Robert invited me to lunch to discuss wedding planning. I arrived at the restaurant to find Blake there instead, wearing a suit and cologne that made my eyes water. Robert had told Blake this was a date I'd agreed to. Blake tried to kiss me, and I shoved him so hard he fell into a plant. Robert showed up an hour later, claiming traffic, and acted shocked that Blake had misunderstood the situation. But I'd seen his car in the parking lot the whole time. He'd been watching from across the street. Robert started telling family members that I seemed conflicted about which brother to marry. Oliver's aunt called him concerned because Robert said I'd been spending time with Blake. Oliver's grandmother asked why I was leading both brothers on. Robert had been poisoning the entire family against me while pushing Blake to pursue me aggressively. Blake started showing up at my work with flowers, telling my coworkers he was my boyfriend. Security had to remove him 3 times. Robert called my boss to apologize for the misunderstanding and said Blake was just confused about which twin I was marrying. My boss asked me if I was really marrying into this insane family. Oliver confronted Robert, but he denied everything. Said Blake was acting on his own feelings and couldn't help that he'd fallen for me. He said maybe it was a sign I'd chosen wrong. He actually suggested Oliver should step aside for his brother's happiness. Oliver told him to go to hell, and Robert said that proved Oliver didn't really love me if he wouldn't consider what was best for everyone. 2 weeks before the wedding, Robert made his biggest move. He called our venue and changed the groom's name on all the paperwork to Blake. He contacted the officiant and said there'd been a mix-up with the twins' names. He even reprinted programs with Blake's name. He planned to create enough confusion on the wedding day that I'd somehow accidentally marry Blake. He didn't know I'd put passwords on all our vendor accounts after the birthday watch incident. Everyone called me immediately about the changes. That's when Oliver and I decided to give Robert exactly what he deserved. We kept the changes. Let Robert think his plan was working. We even had Blake fitted for a tuxedo identical to Oliver's. Robert was practically glowing, thinking he'd orchestrated the perfect switch. The rehearsal dinner came. Robert stood up to give a speech about how love finds a way, and sometimes we need to be pushed toward our true destiny. He kept looking at Blake and winking. He talked about how the right brother would make me happy, and how glad he was I'd finally seen the light. Blake sat there smirking, thinking tomorrow he'd be the groom. That's when Oliver stood up and announced we had something to share. He said we knew about Robert's attempts to switch the brothers. We knew about the vendor calls, the paperwork changes, all of it. Oliver pulled out printed emails from every vendor confirming Robert's interference. Then I stood up and said, since Robert loved Blake so much and thought he was such a catch, we had a surprise. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I pulled Oliver's hand and we stood together in front of the whole room. My voice came out stronger than I expected when I said we had a surprise for everyone tonight. Robert sat there with this satisfied smirk on his face, probably thinking I was about to announce I'd realized Blake was the better choice. Blake leaned back in his chair, looking smug and confident. I took a breath and said that since Robert loved Blake so much and thought he was such a prize, we'd arranged something special. Blake would be getting married tomorrow after all, just not to me. We'd hired someone to play his perfect match, and she'd be arriving any minute to sweep him off his feet using the same manipulation tactics Robert had used on me for the past year. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Robert's face changed colors, going from smug to confused to pale white in about 3 seconds. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Blake still looked confused, his brain clearly not catching up to what I just said. He glanced between me and Robert like he was waiting for someone to explain the joke. Oliver squeezed my hand so hard I felt my bones shift, and then he pulled out this thick folder from under his chair. His hands shook a little as he opened it, but his voice stayed calm and steady. He started reading out loud from the first email, the one from our venue coordinator asking to confirm the name change from Oliver to Blake. Then he read from the florist, who'd received a call from someone claiming to be the groom saying there'd been a mix-up with the twin brothers' names. Then the caterer, then the photographer, then the DJ. Every single vendor we'd hired had received calls from Robert trying to switch the groom's name. Oliver's voice got a little rougher as he read the email from the officiant, where Robert had actually said there'd been a terrible mistake and his son Blake was the real groom, not Oliver. Some people at the table started whispering to each other. A few gasped. Robert finally found his voice and stood up, his chair scraping loud against the floor. He held up his hands and said this was all a misunderstanding, that Oliver was taking things out of context. He said he'd just been trying to help coordinate the wedding and got confused about some details. Gareth stood up from his table near the back. He's Oliver's best friend since college, and he'd been in on our plan from the start. He held up his phone and said he had something everyone needed to hear. He pressed play and Robert's voice came through the speaker, clear as day. The message was from 3 weeks ago. Robert's voice said that Gareth needed to talk some sense into Oliver, about stepping aside for his brother's happiness. He said Blake had real feelings for me, and Oliver was being selfish by not considering what was best for everyone. He actually said that Blake deserved a chance at love, and Oliver should be the bigger person and let me go. The recording played for the whole room to hear. When it ended, people started talking all at once. Some were shocked, some were angry, some looked disgusted. Oliver's grandmother put her hand over her mouth. His uncle shook his head. Blake finally seemed to understand what was happening. His face went red and he jumped up so fast his chair fell backward. A wine glass on his table tipped over and shattered on the floor, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. He started yelling at Robert, asking why he'd made him look like an idiot in front of everyone. He said Robert had promised him this would work, that I'd end up with him instead of Oliver. He completely missed the point that his own behavior, all the stalking and harassment and showing up at my work, was the real problem. He just cared that he'd been embarrassed. I looked over at Oliver's mother. She sat frozen at her table like someone had turned her to stone. Her face was blank, but her hands were moving, folding and refolding her napkin over and over again. I watched her carefully, trying to figure out which way she'd go. Would she defend her husband? Or would she finally admit what he'd done was wrong? She wouldn't look at anyone. Her eyes stayed down on that napkin while her hands kept moving in this repetitive, nervous pattern. My parents stood up from their table and walked over to stand behind Oliver and me. My mom put her hand on my shoulder. My dad walked around and put his hand on Oliver's other shoulder, the one I wasn't holding. My brother and sister came too, forming this wall of support behind us. My dad looked directly at Robert and said what he'd done was unforgivable. He said it was sick to try to manipulate someone's wedding like that, to try to force his son's fiance toward his other son. He said Robert should be ashamed of himself. My throat felt tight and hot with gratitude for my family. Robert's face turned bright red. He stood up and pointed his finger right at me. His voice got loud and angry as he shouted that I was the problem here. He said I'd led Blake on, that I'd been spending time with Blake and giving him mixed signals. He said I was tearing his family apart with lies and manipulation. His face got redder and redder. Spit actually flew from his mouth when he yelled. I saw Oliver's aunt lean back in her chair, physically moving away from Robert like his anger was something she could dodge. Other family members looked uncomfortable or horrified. Oliver's aunt stood up and held out her hand. She said she wanted to see those emails herself. Oliver walked over and handed her the whole folder. She sat back down and started reading through them, flipping page after page. Her hand came up to cover her mouth as she read. When she finished, she looked at Robert with pure disgust on her face. She said she was ashamed to be related to him. She said what he'd done was disturbing and cruel, and that she couldn't believe he'd tried something so manipulative. The room dissolved into chaos. People started arguing with each other. Some of Robert's friends and his brother said we were overreacting, that family problems should stay private. Others demanded to know how Robert could do something so messed up to his own son. Voices got louder. Someone's aunt started crying. Oliver's cousin yelled at Robert's brother for defending him. Oliver took my hand and we started walking toward the exit. My family and Gareth followed us. Behind us, Robert's voice rose above the others, still trying to justify what he'd done, still claiming he just wanted what was best for everyone. We walked out of that restaurant and left him there, still talking, still making excuses, still refusing to admit what he'd really done. Back at our apartment that night, Oliver collapsed onto the couch and put his face in his hands. His shoulders started shaking, and I realized he was crying. Not just crying, but sobbing in a way that scared me because I'd never seen him like this. I sat down next to him and put my arm around his back. He leaned into me, and the sounds coming out of him were raw and broken. He kept saying he couldn't believe his own father would do something like that. He said he knew Robert was difficult, but he never thought his dad would actually try to manipulate someone into marrying the wrong person. I held him tighter and let him cry. He talked about memories from childhood, how Robert used to compare him and Blake constantly, how Robert always made Oliver feel like he wasn't good enough, wasn't tough enough, wasn't the right kind of man. Oliver said he thought things had gotten better when he moved out and started his career. He thought his dad had finally accepted him for who he was. But tonight proved that Robert had never changed. He'd just been waiting for the right opportunity to prove that Blake was the better son. Oliver's voice cracked when he said that. I told him Robert was wrong. I told him he was kind and good, and that's why I chose him. I said his father's opinion didn't matter because we knew the truth. Oliver nodded, but kept crying. He said it still hurt. He said even though he knew Robert was manipulative and cruel, some part of him had hoped his dad would be happy for him, that his dad would support his marriage and be proud of him. Instead, Robert had spent months trying to sabotage everything. Oliver said he felt like he'd lost his father tonight, even though he knew that version of his father probably never existed in the first place. We sat there for over an hour while Oliver cried and talked and processed everything. Around midnight, his phone started buzzing constantly. At first, we ignored it, but it kept going and going. Oliver finally picked it up, and his face went pale as he scrolled through the messages. He showed me the screen. There were texts from his aunt saying she was proud of us for standing up to Robert, messages from 2 cousins saying they had no idea Robert was that bad, and they supported us completely. But there were also angry messages from Robert's brother calling us disrespectful, messages from some older relatives saying we should have handled this privately instead of embarrassing the family. And then there were the messages from Robert himself. The first few were all caps rage. He called Oliver an ungrateful son. He said we'd destroyed the family. He said we'd regret humiliating him in front of everyone. Then the messages shifted to guilt trips. Robert said he'd only wanted what was best for everyone. He said he couldn't believe his own son would turn against him like this. He said Oliver had broken his heart. The messages went back and forth between fury and self-pity. Oliver scrolled through them all with this numb expression on his face. Then he got to a message from his mother. All it said was, "Why did you have to humiliate your father publicly?" Not asking if Oliver was okay, not acknowledging what Robert had done, just asking why we had to embarrass Robert in front of the family. Oliver stared at that message for a long time. Then he turned his phone off and set it face down on the coffee table. He said he couldn't deal with any more tonight. The next morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots. It was our wedding day, but instead of feeling excited, I felt anxious and scared. I kept thinking about Robert and Blake and what they might try to do. Oliver was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hands. He'd turned it back on and was reading through more messages that had come in overnight. He looked exhausted. I asked if he was okay, and he gave me a weak smile and said he would be. He said today we were getting married no matter what Robert tried. My phone rang and I saw it was Jaden. I answered and she immediately started talking in her efficient wedding planner voice. She said she'd arrived at the venue early and positioned security at all the entrances. She had photos of both Robert and Blake and had given strict instructions not to let either of them in under any circumstances. She said the venue staff was aware of the situation and everyone was on high alert. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. I thanked her and she said not to worry, that she had everything under control. Oliver reached over and squeezed my hand after I hung up. I went to my parents' house to get ready, and the moment I walked in, Maxine was there checking her phone. She looked up and said she'd already called all our vendors to confirm the passwords were still active and secure. She said she'd appointed herself head of security for the day and was taking it very seriously. Every few minutes her phone would buzz and she'd check it immediately, looking for any alerts from the venue. She had this intense focus that would have been funny if I wasn't so grateful for it. My mom came downstairs and hugged me. She helped me start getting ready, and while she was doing my hair, she told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything with Robert. She said standing up to bullies was always the right choice, even when it was hard. She said some people would criticize us for making a scene, but that we'd done what we needed to do to protect ourselves. Her words steadied me, and I'd been worried that people would think we were wrong for exposing Robert so publicly. But my mom reminded me that Robert was the one who'd done wrong, not us. We were just refusing to let him get away with it. My phone buzzed with a text from Oliver. It was a photo of him in his tuxedo standing next to Gareth. Both of them were smiling, but I could see the tension around Oliver's eyes. The message below the photo said, "No matter what happens today, I'm grateful we're facing it together as partners." I sent back a heart emoji and a message saying I loved him. My hands were shaking a little as I typed. Maxine noticed and came over to check on me. I showed her Oliver's text and she smiled and said we were going to get through this day and then we'd be married and Robert would just be a bad memory. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going to go wrong. Jaden called again about an hour later. Her voice was tight when she told me Robert had tried to enter the venue. He'd shown up claiming he had a right to see his son get married. Security had turned him away per our instructions, but he'd made a huge scene in the parking lot. He'd yelled and threatened to call the police himself. Jaden said she'd already filed a report with local police just in case he came back. She said he'd finally left, but she was keeping extra security posted at all entrances. My stomach dropped. I'd known Robert might try something, but hearing that he'd actually shown up made everything feel more real and scary. Oliver called me right after and said he'd heard about his dad. His voice sounded strained but steady. He said we were doing the right thing keeping Robert out. He said he was sorry I had to deal with this on our wedding day. 30 minutes after Robert left, Blake showed up. Jaden called to tell me, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. She said Blake was drunk at 11 in the morning. He'd tried to force his way past security, claiming he was the actual groom. He'd been yelling and stumbling and making a scene. Security had escorted him off the property, and Jaden had banned him from returning. She said if he came back, she'd have him arrested for trespassing. Part of me felt safer knowing both Robert and Blake had been turned away. But another part of me felt sad that Oliver's family had fallen apart like this. That his father and brother were so messed up they were trying to ruin our wedding day. I looked at Maxine and my mom and felt grateful I had people who actually cared about me and wanted me to be happy. When my bridesmaids and I finally got in the limo to head to the venue, I was a mess of nerves. We pulled into the parking lot and I immediately saw Oliver's mother's car. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I grabbed Maxine's arm and pointed at the car. Maxine's face went hard and determined. She said she'd go in first to check things out and that I should wait in the limo. I nodded because I didn't trust myself to speak. I sat there with my bridesmaids while Maxine went inside. The minutes felt like hours. I kept staring at the venue entrance, wondering what was happening. Wondering if Oliver's mother was here to support us, or if she was going to cause more problems. Wondering if this whole day was going to be ruined by his family. Maxine finally came back out and got in the limo. She said Oliver's mother was sitting quietly in a pew on the groom's side all by herself. She'd told the ushers she wanted to attend her son's wedding. Maxine said Oliver had spoken with her briefly and decided to allow it, but he'd positioned Gareth nearby to step in if she caused any problems. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Oliver's mother being there felt complicated. She hadn't defended us last night. She'd sent that text asking why we had to humiliate Robert. But she was still Oliver's mom, and this was still his son's wedding. I looked at Maxine and asked if she thought we were making a mistake letting her stay. Maxine said Oliver knew his mother better than we did, and if he thought it was okay, then we should trust his judgment. I nodded and smoothed down my dress and told everyone I was ready to go inside. The ceremony venue looked different from I'd imagined. The chairs were filled with people who'd spent the last year watching Robert try to manipulate me into marrying Blake. Some of them had believed his lies about me being conflicted. Some of them had called Oliver to ask what was really going on. Now they were all here, sitting quietly, waiting to see what would happen after last night's explosion at the rehearsal dinner. I stood in the back hallway with my bridesmaids, holding my dad's arm, listening to the music start. Maxine adjusted my veil one more time and squeezed my hand. She whispered that I looked beautiful, and that Oliver was going to lose it when he saw me. My dad kissed my forehead and asked if I was ready. I nodded because I couldn't speak without crying. The doors opened and everyone stood up. I kept my eyes locked on Oliver at the front of the aisle. He was standing next to Gareth, wearing the tuxedo we'd picked out together, and his face just crumpled when he saw me. Tears started running down his cheeks immediately. I heard whispers as I walked past the rows of guests. People were definitely talking about what happened last night. I could see the empty seats on the groom's side, where Robert and Blake should have been sitting. Oliver's mother was there alone in the front row, but Robert's chair next to her was conspicuously vacant. Blake's seat was empty too. The absence felt like a weight pressing down on the whole ceremony. I focused on Oliver's face and kept walking. Nothing else mattered except getting to him. When I reached the front and my dad put my hand in Oliver's fingers were shaking. He mouthed that I looked perfect and I mouthed back that he was crying. He laughed and wiped his eyes with his free hand. The officiant started talking about marriage and commitment and choosing your partner every day. I tried to listen, but I kept thinking about how this should have been different. This should have been a celebration with Oliver's whole family here. Instead, his father and brother were banned from the venue and his mother was sitting alone looking devastated. The officiant asked us to face each other for our vows. Oliver held both my hands and started speaking about how I made him braver, how I taught him to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. His voice cracked a little when he said he was grateful I chose him and kept choosing him despite everything. I heard someone crying loudly and glanced over at the guests. Oliver's mother had tears streaming down her face. Her shoulders were shaking and she was pressing a tissue to her eyes. I couldn't tell if she was crying because she was happy for Oliver or because her family had fallen apart. Maybe both. The complicated mess of emotions on her face reflected everything we were dealing with. This wasn't a simple happy ending. This was us getting married while Oliver's family imploded around us. I said my vows about partnership and respect and building a life based on honesty. I promised to always tell Oliver the truth and to never let anyone manipulate our relationship. Several people in the audience shifted in their seats at that line. Everyone knew what I was referring to. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. Oliver kissed me and the guests started clapping. The applause sounded muted and restrained compared to what I'd imagined our wedding would be like. People were clapping, but the energy felt heavy and subdued. The shadow of last night's confrontation was hanging over everything. We walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife. I saw Oliver's aunt dabbing her eyes and smiling at us. I saw Oliver's cousin giving us a thumbs up. I also saw 3 empty chairs where other relatives had apparently decided not to come after what happened at the rehearsal dinner. The family division was already visible. The reception hall was decorated exactly how we'd planned. White flowers everywhere, candles on every table, soft music playing. It should have felt magical, but instead it felt tense. Oliver and I stood by the entrance greeting guests as they came in. Several of Oliver's relatives approached us immediately. His aunt hugged us both and said she was ashamed of Robert's behavior. She said what he did was sick and wrong, and she supported us completely. Oliver's cousin apologized for not speaking up sooner about the weird things Robert had been saying. He said he should have called Oliver months ago when Robert started talking about me being confused about which brother to marry. 3 more relatives came over to express similar sentiments. They were sorry. They supported us. They thought Robert's manipulation was disturbing, but other relatives avoided us entirely. Oliver's uncle walked past us without making eye contact and went straight to the bar. 2 of Robert's friends left immediately after the ceremony without even coming to the reception. Oliver's grandmother sat at a far table and wouldn't look at us. The family division was painfully obvious in who approached us and who didn't, who sat where and who talked to whom. Oliver kept his arm around my waist the whole time, but I could feel the tension in his body. We sat down for dinner, and I watched Oliver's mother across the room. She was sitting alone at a table, picking at her food, not talking to anyone. She looked small and sad and lost. Halfway through the meal, she stood up and walked over to our table. My stomach clenched. Oliver stood up when she approached. She asked if she could talk to him privately for a minute. Oliver looked at me, and I nodded. They walked a few feet away, and I watched them talk. Oliver's mother was crying again. She kept touching Oliver's arm, and he kept nodding. They talked for maybe 5 minutes before Oliver hugged her. When he came back to the table, he told me she apologized. She said she was sorry for not defending him sooner. She said she knew Robert's behavior toward me was wrong, but she didn't want to believe her husband was capable of that level of manipulation. She said she should have protected Oliver from his father's toxicity. Oliver's voice was quiet when he told me this. He said her apology felt genuine but incomplete. She didn't acknowledge her own role in enabling Robert. She didn't admit that she'd sent him that text last night asking why we had to humiliate Robert. She was sorry, but she was still making excuses. I squeezed Oliver's hand under the table. My dad stood up to give his toast. He talked about how proud he was of me and how much he liked Oliver. He said the most important thing in a marriage was choosing a partner who respects your boundaries and builds you up rather than tears you down. He said manipulation and control have no place in real love. Several people glanced at Oliver's mother when he said that. She stared down at her plate and didn't look up. My dad raised his glass and everyone drank. The toast was perfect but also pointed. Everyone knew what he was really talking about. Gareth stood up next for his best man speech. He started with a funny story about Oliver in college. Something about Oliver staying up all night to help a classmate study for an exam, even though Oliver had his own exam the next morning. He talked about how Oliver was the most genuinely kind person he'd ever met, how Oliver treated everyone with respect and dignity, how Oliver had always been the brother who saw people as equals rather than objects to control. The contrast with Blake wasn't subtle at all. Gareth never said Blake's name, but everyone understood. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Oliver's mother wiped her eyes again. The speech was warm and loving, but it also highlighted everything that made Robert's manipulation so twisted. Oliver was good, and Robert had tried to destroy that. We stood up for our first dance. Oliver held me close and we swayed to the music. He whispered that he was grieving. He said this should have been a celebration with his whole family, but instead, half of them weren't speaking to us. He said he felt sad about the family gathering we'd never have. But he also said he felt free. Free from his father's toxic influence. Free from the constant pressure to accommodate Blake's behavior. Free to build the life he actually wanted. I told him it was okay to feel both things at once. Grief and relief. Sadness and freedom. Life wasn't simple or clean. We kept dancing, and I felt his body relax slightly against mine. Around 9 o'clock, one of the venue staff came running over to Jaden. I watched them have an urgent conversation, and then Jaden walked quickly toward the exit doors. Oliver and I followed her. Through the glass doors, I could see Blake pounding on the locked entrance. He was screaming something, but I couldn't hear the words clearly. His face was red and twisted with rage. Security guards were standing between him and the doors. Jaden pulled out her phone and called the police. Blake kept pounding and yelling. I caught fragments of what he was screaming. Something about me being a manipulative liar. Something about me stealing his life. Something about how I was supposed to marry him. Oliver stood at the window watching his brother completely lose control. His face looked devastated. Not angry, just broken. 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot within minutes. Officers got out and approached Blake. He tried to push past them toward the doors. They grabbed his arms and he started fighting them. It took 3 officers to get him into handcuffs. They walked him to one of the police cars and put him in the back seat. Blake was still screaming through the car window. Oliver watched the whole thing happen. He didn't say anything, just stood there with his hand pressed against the glass. Jaden came back inside and told us Blake had been removed from the property and would be charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. She apologized that it happened at all. Oliver thanked her quietly. We went back to the reception, but the mood had completely shifted. Several guests had seen what happened with Blake through the windows. People were whispering and looking uncomfortable. 3 couples left early without saying goodbye. Oliver's grandmother left immediately after Blake was arrested. 2 of Oliver's cousins made quick excuses and departed. The reception that was supposed to go until midnight ended around 10. People were tired and upset and ready to leave. Oliver and I stood by the door thanking people as they left. Most people hugged us and wished us well. A few just nodded awkwardly and hurried out. By 10:30, only my immediate family and Gareth and Maxine were left. We all stood around for a few minutes, not knowing what to say. Finally, my mom hugged us both and said she loved us and was proud of us. Everyone else said their goodbyes and left. Oliver and I got in the car to drive to our hotel. We sat in silence for the first few minutes. I felt completely drained. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, but instead, it felt like we'd survived a battle. Oliver reached over and took my hand. He said he loved me. I said I loved him too. At the hotel, we went straight up to our room. We'd booked a fancy suite with champagne and rose petals, but neither of us had the energy to appreciate it. We just changed into comfortable clothes and sat on the bed. Oliver put his head on my shoulder and I put my arms around him. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just holding each other. Our wedding night was quiet and subdued. We were married, which was what mattered. But we were also exhausted and emotionally destroyed. We fell asleep early, wrapped around each other, processing everything that had happened. The next morning, we flew to Colorado for our honeymoon. Oliver had booked a cabin in the mountains, remote and quiet, surrounded by pine trees and hiking trails. We drove up a winding road for an hour after landing, watching the elevation climb and the air get colder. The cabin was small but perfect, with a stone fireplace and huge windows overlooking the valley below. We unpacked our bags and stood on the deck looking at the view. Neither of us said anything for a few minutes. The silence felt good after all the noise and chaos of the wedding. Oliver put his arm around me and I leaned into him. We needed this space away from everything. That first night, we sat by the fire and talked about what came next. Oliver said we should limit contact with his family for a while. At least 3 months, maybe longer. Everyone needed time to process what happened at the rehearsal dinner and the wedding. His mom needed space to figure out her relationship with Robert. Blake needed to deal with his own issues without dragging us into them. Robert needed to face what he'd done without us there to blame. I agreed completely. We couldn't start our marriage while constantly managing his family's drama. Oliver looked relieved when I said yes. I think he was worried I'd want to fix things right away or force some kind of reconciliation. But I was done being manipulated, done being the target of Robert's sick schemes, done pretending Blake's behavior was acceptable. We made a pact that night. No family visits, no big gatherings, no pressure to smooth things over or make peace. Just us, building our life together without interference. Oliver's phone started buzzing the next morning. He looked at the screen and his face went tight. 7 missed calls from Robert. 12 voicemails. Oliver put the phone down without listening to them. It kept buzzing throughout breakfast. More calls, more voicemails. By noon, there were 15 messages waiting. Oliver finally picked up his phone and played the first one on speaker. Robert's voice filled the cabin, loud and angry. He was shouting about how we destroyed the family, how we'd humiliated him in front of everyone, how Oliver was a terrible son who'd chosen a manipulative woman over his own father. The message cut off after a minute. Oliver played the next one. This time, Robert sounded different. Sad. Almost crying. He said his heart was broken, that he'd only wanted what was best for everyone, that we'd ruined Blake's life and his marriage. He begged Oliver to call him back so they could talk like adults. The third message was angry again. Robert called me names I won't repeat, said Oliver was weak and pathetic for letting me control him, threatened to cut Oliver out of his will. The messages went on like that, back and forth between rage and self-pity, blaming us for everything, claiming he was the victim, never once taking responsibility for what he'd actually done. Oliver listened to all 15 messages without saying a word. His jaw was clenched and his hands were shaking by the end. When the last one finished, he opened his phone settings and blocked Robert's number. He didn't hesitate, just blocked him and put the phone away. We spent the rest of the week hiking and cooking meals together. Oliver's phone stayed mostly silent after he blocked Robert. A few texts from his mom that he didn't answer. One call from Blake that went to voicemail. Otherwise, it was peaceful. We talked about our future, where we wanted to live long-term, whether we wanted kids, what kind of traditions we wanted to build together, normal couple stuff that felt impossible when Robert was constantly interfering. On our last day in the mountains, Oliver said he felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Blocking his father felt scary but also right. He said he'd spent years trying to manage Robert's behavior, trying to keep peace, trying to protect me while not completely destroying his family. But Robert had made his choice when he tried to sabotage our wedding. Some things couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. We flew home a week after we'd left. The apartment felt different when we walked in. Still ours, but we were different now. Married, united against whatever came next. The answering machine was blinking with messages. Oliver played them while unpacking. His aunt had called twice asking us to call her back. His cousin left a message saying she needed to talk to us about something important. Oliver's uncle, Robert's brother, had called demanding an explanation for our behavior at the rehearsal dinner. Oliver's grandmother left a message saying she was very disappointed in both of us. The last message was from a family friend we barely knew, asking if what she'd heard about the wedding was true. Oliver deleted all the messages and sat down on the couch looking exhausted. I made coffee and sat next to him. We both knew what was happening. Robert was spinning his own version of events, telling people his side of the story, making himself look like the victim. Oliver called his aunt first. She answered on the second ring and immediately asked if we were okay. She said Robert had been calling family members all week, telling them we'd attacked him at the rehearsal dinner for no reason, that we'd embarrassed him publicly because we didn't like him, that he'd tried to help plan our wedding and we'd turned on him. She said several relatives who hadn't been at the rehearsal dinner were calling her asking what really happened. She told them she'd been there and seen everything, but they wanted to hear from us directly. Oliver thanked her and said he'd handle it. He hung up and looked at me. We needed to tell our side before Robert poisoned everyone against us. That night, Oliver sat at his laptop and started writing. He wrote for 3 hours straight, barely stopping. I read over his shoulder as he typed. He explained everything Robert had done, the seating arrangements at family dinners, the birthday watch incident, the fake lunch date with Blake, the vendor interference, the changed paperwork, all of it laid out in detail with dates and examples. He attached the vendor emails we'd printed for the rehearsal dinner, screenshots of Robert's text messages pushing Blake toward me, photos of Blake at my workplace that security had documented, everything we had to prove what Robert had done. At the bottom, Oliver wrote that he wasn't asking anyone to choose sides. He just wanted people to know the truth before making judgments. He said we needed space and wouldn't be attending family events for a while. He asked that people respect our boundaries and stop pressuring us to reconcile with Robert before Robert took responsibility for his actions. Oliver read it through twice, then hit send to his entire extended family email list. 43 people got that email. His grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, everyone. We went to bed not knowing how people would react. The responses started coming in the next morning. Oliver's aunt replied first saying she was proud of him for standing up to Robert. She said she was cutting contact with Robert until he got help for whatever was wrong with him. Oliver's 2 cousins sent similar messages. They'd witnessed enough of Robert's behavior over the years to believe everything Oliver wrote. They said they were on our side completely, but other responses weren't as supportive. Robert's brother sent a long, angry email defending Robert and saying we'd clearly misunderstood innocent attempts to help. He said family should forgive and move on, that airing dirty laundry publicly was shameful. Several of Oliver's older relatives sent shorter versions of the same message. They thought we'd overreacted. They said Robert might have made mistakes, but he meant well. They urged us to apologize and make peace. Oliver's mother sent a message that was careful and neutral. She said she loved Oliver and wanted him to be happy. She said she believed us about what Robert did, but she was still processing everything. She needed time to figure out her own path forward. She didn't take a clear side either way. Oliver read all the responses out loud to me. The family was splitting exactly like we'd expected. Some people firmly supported us. Others defended Robert. And some, like his mother, were trying to stay neutral and maintain relationships with everyone. Oliver looked sad but not surprised. He said this was probably how it would be from now on. Some family members at holidays and events, others absent. Awkward phone calls and uncomfortable decisions about who to invite to what. The price of standing up to Robert was a fractured family. 3 weeks later, Oliver got a call from his supportive cousin. Blake had been arrested the night before. Drunk and disorderly conduct at a bar downtown. The police report said he'd been ranting about his brother stealing his fiance. He'd gotten into a fight with another patron who told him to shut up. Blake had shoved the guy into a table and security called the cops. Oliver listened to his cousin explain what happened. His face looked tired and sad. He thanked her for telling him and hung up. He sat quietly for a minute, then told me about Blake's arrest. I asked how he felt about it. Oliver said he felt sad, but not surprised. Blake's life had been on this path for years. The arrest was just another step in the same direction. He said part of him wanted to help Blake, but he knew that would just enable more bad behavior. Blake needed to face consequences for once instead of having family bail him out. I was dealing with my own stuff. The year of manipulation and boundary violations had messed me up more than I wanted to admit. I kept having dreams about Robert watching me from parking lots, about Blake showing up at my work, about the restaurant where Blake tried to kiss me. I'd wake up anxious and it would take hours to shake the feeling. I finally made an appointment with a therapist, a woman named Dr. Smith who specialized in family trauma. I went to my first session not sure what to say. She asked me to describe what happened and I started talking. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her everything. The engagement party, the seating charts, the birthday watch, the vendor interference, the rehearsal dinner confrontation. All of it came pouring out. Dr. Smith listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said what Robert did was psychological abuse. He deliberately tried to destabilize my sense of reality. make me doubt myself, isolate me from Oliver. Hearing her name it so clearly made something click in my brain. I wasn't crazy for being so affected by what happened. It was actual abuse, intentional and calculated. Dr. Smith said my anxiety and dreams were normal responses to sustained manipulation. We'd work on processing what happened and rebuilding my sense of safety. She asked if Oliver would be willing to come to some sessions together. I said I'd ask him. Oliver agreed immediately when I brought it up. He said he wanted to work on building our life together separate from his toxic family. We started going to couples counseling with Dr. Smith every other week. She helped us talk about what family meant to us now, what boundaries we needed, how to support each other when his family tried to push back against those boundaries. Dr. Smith said we got to define family for ourselves. It didn't have to include people who refused to respect us or our relationship. Family could be the people we chose, not just the people we were born to. That idea felt revolutionary. We could build something new instead of trying to fix something broken. 4 months after the wedding, I got a Facebook message request from Robert. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. The message was long. Robert wrote that Oliver had always been jealous of Blake, that Blake was more confident and successful and Oliver couldn't handle it. He said Oliver had manipulated me into believing lies about his innocent attempts to help Blake find love. He claimed everything that happened was Oliver's fault for being insecure and vindictive. He said I seemed like a smart woman and he hoped I'd see through Oliver's manipulation before it was too late. I read the whole thing feeling cold. Robert still didn't get it. Still blamed everyone but himself. Still thought he could manipulate me even after everything that happened. I took screenshots of the entire message, sent them to Oliver with a note saying his father tried to contact me. Then I blocked Robert without responding. Oliver looked at the screenshots and shook his head. He said Robert would never change, never take responsibility, never admit what he'd done was wrong. We'd made the right choice, cutting contact. A week later, Oliver's mother called. She wanted to invite us to Thanksgiving dinner at her house, 4 months after the wedding. Oliver put the phone on speaker so I could hear. His mother said she missed him. She wanted to see us and spend time together as a family. She promised it would just be her and us. No Robert, no Blake, just a quiet dinner. Oliver asked if she was still in contact with Robert. His mother hesitated, then said yes. They were still married, still living together. She said their relationship was complicated, but she wasn't ready to leave. Oliver's face fell. He asked if Robert would know we were coming to Thanksgiving. His mother said she wouldn't tell him, but she couldn't promise he wouldn't find out somehow. Oliver thanked her and said he needed to talk to me before deciding. He'd call her back. We hung up and sat in silence for a long time. This was the impossible decision we'd been dreading. If we went to Thanksgiving with Oliver's mother, were we accepting her continued relationship with Robert? Were we saying it was okay that she stayed with him after everything he'd done? But if we didn't go, we'd be cutting off Oliver's mother completely. She was trying to maintain some relationship with us. She'd apologized, even if it wasn't perfect. She was in a hard position too. Oliver said he didn't know what to do. He wanted to see his mother, but he didn't want to reward her for staying with Robert. He didn't want to sit at Thanksgiving dinner knowing she'd go home to the man who'd tried to destroy our relationship. I said I'd support whatever he decided. This was his mother, his family, his choice. We talked about it for hours that night. The pros and cons. The boundaries we'd need if we went. The message we'd send either way. We went back and forth, neither of us sure what the right answer was. The decision felt impossible. In the end, Oliver and I decided not to go to his mother's house for Thanksgiving. The decision took us 3 days of talking it through, weighing what we owed her against what we owed ourselves. Oliver called her back and told her we appreciated the invitation, but we needed more time. His voice shook when he said it. I could hear his mother crying through the phone even though it wasn't on speaker. She said she understood, but asked if Oliver could at least call her on Thanksgiving Day. He promised he would. We spent the holiday at my parents' house instead, surrounded by my siblings and their kids, eating too much pie and watching football. It felt right being there with people who had never tried to manipulate us or push us towards something we didn't want. But it also felt sad knowing Oliver's mother was probably sitting alone in her house while Robert did whatever Robert was doing. Oliver excused himself around 3 in the afternoon and went outside to make the call. I watched him through the kitchen window, pacing back and forth on the driveway with the phone pressed to his ear. He was out there for almost 40 minutes. When he came back and his eyes were red and he went straight to the bathroom, I found him sitting on the edge of the tub with his head in his hands. He told me his mother had cried the whole time, saying she missed him and wished things were different. She said she understood why we were staying away, but it didn't make the loneliness any easier. Oliver had tried to explain that we needed boundaries to protect ourselves, that her choice to stay with Robert made it impossible for us to be around her right now. She had said she knew that, said it wasn't fair to ask us to come back until she figured out what she was doing with her marriage. Then she had thanked him for calling and told him she loved him. Oliver sat there on the bathroom floor and cried for his mother, for the family that used to exist before everything fell apart. 3 weeks later, right before Christmas, Oliver's mother called again. This time, her voice sounded different, more stressed. She said Blake had lost another job. His 7th firing in 2 years, and this one was from a warehouse where he'd been working night shifts. The manager said Blake had shown up drunk twice in 1 week, and they couldn't keep him on. Oliver's mother asked if Oliver could help Blake find work since he was so good at helping people, since he had connections through his physical therapy practice. I watched Oliver's face harden as she talked. He put the phone on speaker so I could hear. She was going through a list of Blake's skills, trying to make him sound employable, but everything she said just highlighted the problem. Blake was good with his hands when he showed up on time. Blake could lift heavy things when he wasn't hungover. Blake worked well with others when he controlled his temper. Oliver let her finish before he responded. He told her gently, but firmly, that Blake's employment problems came from Blake's behavior, not from a lack of opportunities. He said helping Blake find another job would just enable him to keep making the same mistakes without facing consequences. He said the kindest thing anyone could do for Blake right now was to let him experience the natural results of his choices, instead of constantly rescuing him. Oliver's mother went quiet for a long time. Then she said she was just trying to help her son, that she didn't know what else to do. Oliver told her he understood, but that he couldn't be part of the rescue cycle anymore. After he hung up, he looked exhausted. He said he felt guilty, but he knew he'd done the right thing. I held his hand and told him that setting boundaries with family was one of the hardest things a person could do. We hosted a small party at our house for New Year's Eve. Just close friends and my family, maybe 20 people total. I spent the afternoon cooking while Oliver set up the living room with chairs and a folding table for drinks. Maxine arrived early to help me finish the food, and we worked together in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and mixing dips. My parents came with my 2 brothers and their families. The kids ran around the house playing tag while the adults talked and laughed. Gareth showed up with his girlfriend and a bottle of champagne. Everyone was relaxed and happy, no tension, no watching over shoulders for someone to cause problems. Around 11:30, we all gathered in the living room to watch the countdown on TV. I looked around at the faces of people who genuinely cared about us, who supported us without trying to control us, or push us towards something we didn't want. This was the first major holiday celebration in months where I felt completely safe. No wondering if Robert would show up and make a scene. No Blake trying to insert himself where he wasn't wanted. No careful navigation of family politics and Robert's manipulation. Just people we loved, celebrating together. When midnight came and everyone cheered, Oliver kissed me and whispered that this felt like starting fresh. We were building our own traditions separate from his family's chaos. We got to decide what family meant to us now. In January, Oliver's aunt called with news about Robert. She said he'd been asked to step down from his position on a community board that organized local charity events. Apparently, several board members had heard about what happened at our wedding through the family network. They'd approached Robert privately and suggested he resign rather than forcing them to remove him. Robert had tried to defend himself, claiming we'd blown everything out of proportion, but too many people knew the truth. The aunt said Robert was furious about it, calling everyone traitors and saying the whole town was against him. But the reality was that his manipulation campaign had social consequences beyond just family relationships. People in the community who respected Oliver and knew his character had started questioning Robert's judgment and integrity. The aunt said she'd heard through another friend that Robert had also been quietly removed from a volunteer position at his church. Nothing official or public, just a phone call suggesting he take a break from leadership roles. Oliver listened to all of this with a complicated expression. Part of him was satisfied that Robert was facing real consequences. Part of him felt sad that his father's reputation was crumbling. I reminded him that Robert had done this to himself, that these were the natural results of his choices. The same concept Oliver had explained to his mother about Blake. 2 weeks later, Oliver's mother called crying. Blake had been arrested for his second DUI. He'd crashed his car into a mailbox at 2 in the morning, not hurt, but definitely drunk. The judge had ordered substance abuse treatment as part of his sentence. Blake was going to a 30-day residential program starting the following week. Oliver's mother begged Oliver to visit Blake in rehab, to show family support during this difficult time. She said Blake needed to know people still cared about him, that he wasn't alone. Oliver took a deep breath before responding. He told his mother that Blake needed to face the consequences of his actions, without family members rushing in to make him feel better about it. He said true support meant letting Blake sit with the discomfort of what he'd done and make real changes, not just reassuring him that everything would be okay. He said he hoped the treatment program would help Blake, but that he wouldn't be visiting. His mother started crying harder, saying she didn't understand how Oliver could be so cold to his own brother. Oliver's voice stayed calm, but I could see his hands shaking. He said he wasn't being cold. He was being honest about what Blake needed, which was accountability, not rescue. After the call ended, Oliver sat on the couch staring at nothing for 20 minutes. A few days later, we met Oliver's mother for lunch at a restaurant halfway between our house and hers. We'd spent hours the night before establishing clear boundaries for this meeting. Oliver called her that morning to lay out the terms. We would meet once a month at a neutral location for lunch. We would not attend any events where Robert or Blake would be present. We would not discuss Robert or Blake during our visits unless his mother brought up something directly affecting her safety or well-being. If she tried to guilt us about them or push us to reconcile, we would end the visit immediately. Oliver's mother agreed through tears, saying limited contact was better than none, that she would respect whatever boundaries we needed. The lunch itself was tense at first. We sat at a corner table and ordered food while making awkward small talk about the weather and the restaurant's menu. Oliver's mother kept twisting her napkin in her lap, clearly nervous. But slowly, the conversation found safer ground. She asked about my work and actually listened to my answer, instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. She asked Oliver about his physical therapy patients and seemed genuinely interested in the stories he shared. We made it through the entire meal without anyone mentioning Robert or Blake. As we were leaving, Oliver's mother hugged us both and thanked us for giving her this chance. In the parking lot afterward, Oliver said it was a start, just a small step. But trust would take much longer to rebuild. Our second monthly lunch in February went better than the first. Oliver's mother showed up with photos on her phone of a garden she was planning for spring. She talked about joining a book club with women from her neighborhood. She asked about our house and what projects we were working on. The conversation felt more natural, less like we were all walking on broken glass. She didn't try to bring up Robert or Blake even once. When we said goodbye, she told Oliver she was proud of him for building a good life. On the drive home, Oliver said he could see his mother trying to develop an identity separate from being Robert's wife and Blake's mother. He said it gave him hope that maybe eventually they could have a real relationship again. That same week, I got a promotion at work. My boss called me into her office and told me they were creating a new senior position and wanted me to fill it. More responsibility, better pay, a small team to manage. I'd been working toward this for 2 years, and it felt amazing to have it actually happen. I called Oliver from my car before driving home, and he answered on the first ring. I told him the news, and he shouted so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. That night, he surprised me with reservations at a nice restaurant downtown, just the two of us. We sat at a table by the window, and he toasted to my success with champagne. The simplicity of celebrating an achievement without family drama crashing in felt luxurious. No Robert showing up to make it about Blake, no complicated family dynamics to navigate, just Oliver being genuinely happy for me and us enjoying a quiet dinner together. He told me he was proud of me and that he loved seeing me succeed. We walked home afterward holding hands, talking about what we'd do with the extra money from my raise. In March, Oliver's cousin called with her own good news. She was engaged and planning a wedding for the following fall. She wanted to tell us personally before sending out save the dates. Then she said something that made both Oliver and I exhale in relief. She said Robert and Blake were not invited to her wedding, that she'd witnessed Robert's manipulation firsthand at our rehearsal dinner, and wanted no part of that toxicity at her celebration. She said she'd already told her parents, and they supported the decision. Oliver thanked her for being so clear about her boundaries, and told her we'd be honored to attend. After the call, we looked at each other, and Oliver said it felt good, knowing we weren't the only ones in the family willing to draw lines. His cousin's wedding would be a place where we could actually relax and celebrate without watching our backs. 2 weeks later, Oliver's mother called crying again. Blake had completed his 30-day rehab program and been released the previous Thursday. By Saturday, he'd relapsed, showing up drunk at her house asking for money. She'd refused, and he'd gotten angry, punching a hole in her kitchen wall before leaving. She said she didn't know what to do anymore, that the family was falling apart, and she felt helpless to stop it. Oliver listened to her cry for several minutes before speaking. His voice was compassionate but firm when he reminded her that Robert's manipulation and Blake's behavior had created this situation, not our decision to enforce boundaries. He said Blake's relapse was Blake's choice, and that she couldn't fix him or save him. He said the only person she could control was herself and the boundaries she chose to set. His mother asked what she was supposed to do if Blake showed up drunk again. Oliver told her to call the police if she felt unsafe, to protect herself first. She said she didn't know if she could do that to her own son. Oliver told her gently that letting Blake face legal consequences might be the thing that finally pushed him toward real change. After they hung up, Oliver looked drained. He said watching his family self-destruct was exhausting, even from a distance. I tried talking him through it that night, but he kept circling back to the same question about why his dad would do something so cruel. We went over it from every angle, and I didn't have good answers, except that Robert wanted control more than he wanted Oliver's happiness. That truth sat heavy between us as we finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. The next few weeks passed in a blur of wedding aftermath and family fallout management. Oliver's cousin sent her save-the-date card in mid-March with a handwritten note at the bottom saying she'd already told her parents that Robert and Blake weren't welcome at her celebration. She said she'd watched Robert manipulate everyone at our rehearsal dinner and refused to let that toxicity anywhere near her wedding day. Oliver read the note 3 times before showing it to me with tears in his eyes. He said it meant everything to know that someone else in his family saw the situation clearly and chose to protect their own boundaries. We marked the wedding date on our calendar for April, and Oliver admitted he was looking forward to attending a family event where he could actually relax instead of staying on guard the whole time. My promotion became official at the start of April, and came with a 15% raise that would make a real difference in our budget. Oliver took me to dinner at a small Italian place near our apartment to celebrate, and we spent the whole meal talking about what we'd do with the extra money. He suggested putting most of it toward a house down payment since we'd been saving for that goal anyway. The waiter brought us free dessert when Oliver mentioned we were celebrating my promotion, and we walked home holding hands in the spring air. Oliver told me he was proud of me and loved seeing me succeed at work. No drama crashed in to ruin the moment. No Robert showing up to make it about Blake somehow. No complicated family dynamics to navigate around a simple achievement. Just my husband being genuinely happy for me, and us enjoying a quiet celebration together. The simplicity felt luxurious after months of constant tension and manipulation. Oliver's cousin got married on a Saturday in late April at a garden venue about an hour from our place. We drove there together listening to music, and Oliver seemed lighter than I'd seen him in months. The ceremony was beautiful and simple, with the couple's closest friends and family gathered under flowering trees. During the reception, I watched Oliver dance with his aunt and his supportive cousins, without that tense watchfulness he'd carried at our own wedding. Nobody was plotting or scheming or trying to manipulate anyone. It was just people who genuinely cared about each other celebrating something happy. When Oliver and I danced together later, he pulled me close and said this was what our wedding should have felt like. I agreed, but also pointed out that we'd survived something really hard together and come out stronger on the other side. He kissed my forehead and said he was grateful for that perspective, even though he still mourned what we'd lost to his father's toxicity. We stayed until the end of the reception and drove home, tired but genuinely happy. Oliver said on the drive that he thought we'd both done a lot of healing in the 6 months since our wedding, and I could see the truth of that in how much more relaxed he seemed. Oliver's mother called him in early May with news that she'd filed for legal separation from Robert. Her voice shook on the phone as she explained that she couldn't keep living with someone who'd done what Robert did to their son. Oliver listened quietly and told her he was proud of her for protecting herself, even though he knew it was hard. After the call ended, he sat on our couch looking sad but also relieved. He said he'd been worried about his mother staying trapped with Robert forever, and that her decision to leave gave him hope she might actually start healing too. 2 weeks later, his aunt called with family gossip that Robert had already started dating someone new. Apparently, he'd met her at his gym and was already trying to control who she spent time with and where she went. Oliver's aunt said the new girlfriend seemed uncomfortable at a family gathering where Robert had shown up were uninvited. Oliver felt sad for this woman he'd never met who was walking into Robert's manipulation patterns without knowing what she was getting into. But he also felt relieved that his mother had gotten out before wasting more years on someone who would never change. Blake moved to another state in June to live with Robert's brother, who apparently offered him a place to stay and help finding work. Oliver's mother told us about it during one of our monthly lunches and seemed relieved that Blake would be far away getting a fresh start. Oliver nodded and said he hoped the distance would be good for Blake, but he also admitted to me later that he felt guilty about how relieved he was that his brother was gone. Our therapist reminded him during our next session that protecting himself from someone who'd caused harm didn't make him a bad person. She said Oliver had every right to feel relief about Blake being far away, even while hoping his brother eventually got help. Oliver cried during that session and said he'd spent so long trying to be a good brother that he'd forgotten he was allowed to prioritize his own safety and peace. I held his hand and told him I was proud of how much work he'd put into understanding himself better. Oliver's mother called again in mid-June, asking if we could meet for lunch because she had something important to tell us. We met her at a cafe near our apartment, and she looked nervous as she ordered tea. Then she told us she'd started therapy herself and had been working through her own role in enabling Robert's behavior for years. She apologized for not protecting Oliver from his father's toxicity, and for not standing up to Robert when she saw him manipulating me. Her apology was specific this time, instead of vague like before. She listed actual things she'd done wrong, like staying silent at family dinners when Robert seated me next to Blake, or not questioning Robert when he took my gift and gave it to Blake at Oliver's birthday party. She said her therapist was helping her understand how she'd chosen peace over protecting her children, and that she was deeply sorry for those choices. Oliver listened with tears running down his face and told her that her apology meant a lot, because it showed she understood what she'd actually done. I watched them hug across the table and felt cautiously hopeful that Oliver's mother was genuinely trying to change. We bought our first house in late June after months of searching for the right place. It was small with 2 bedrooms and a backyard where we could eventually put in a garden. The mortgage payment would stretch our budget, but we'd saved enough for a good down payment thanks to my raise. Oliver walked through every room during our final walkthrough with this huge smile on his face, talking about where we'd put furniture and how we'd paint the walls. We signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon and got the keys the same day. That night, we sat on the floor of our empty living room eating takeout and making plans for the space. Oliver said it felt good to be building something that was completely ours, without any family drama attached to it. We agreed not to tell Robert or Blake our new address, and Oliver's mother knew, but had proven over the past few months that she'd respect our privacy. Moving in took 2 weekends with help from my family and our close friends. By mid-July, we were mostly settled and starting to feel at home in our own space. We hosted a barbecue at our new house in August with my family and our closest friends, including Maxine and Gareth. Oliver manned the grill while I set up food on our back patio table. Maxine helped me carry drinks outside and told me how happy I seemed compared to a year ago. I realized she was right. The constant stress of Robert's manipulation had lifted, and Oliver and I were building the peaceful life we'd wanted all along. During dinner, Oliver stood up and tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. He said he wanted to thank everyone for supporting us through a really hard year, and that he was starting to feel more joy than grief about his family situation. He said he was learning to build the family he chose rather than mourning the one he couldn't have, and that shift felt important. Everyone raised their glasses, and my dad said he was proud of both of us for protecting our relationship and setting healthy boundaries. The evening felt easy and warm without any underlying tension or drama waiting to explode. Just people who cared about each other enjoying good food and company in our backyard. Oliver's aunt called in late August to report that Robert's new girlfriend had broken up with him after 3 months together. Apparently, Robert had tried to control who she spent time with, and she'd ended things immediately. Now, Robert was telling people she was crazy and unstable, which was exactly the pattern we'd seen him use before. Oliver's aunt said it would be funny how predictable Robert was if it wasn't so sad that he kept hurting people and never learned anything from it. Oliver agreed and said he hoped Robert would eventually face enough consequences to actually change, but he wasn't holding his breath. After the call, Oliver looked at me and said he was glad we'd gotten out when we did, because watching his father repeat the same toxic patterns from a distance was hard enough without being caught up in them directly. Our first anniversary arrived on a Tuesday in late August, and we both took the day off work to spend it together. Oliver surprised me by setting up our backyard with string lights and flowers early that morning. Maxine and Gareth arrived around noon, and the four of us spent the afternoon renewing our private vows to each other. We'd rewritten them to include promises about maintaining boundaries and choosing each other even when it was hard. Oliver's voice shook when he promised to keep protecting our relationship from outside manipulation and to trust me enough to face hard things together. I promised to keep communicating honestly with him and to never let anyone make me doubt what we'd built together. Maxine cried through the whole thing, and Gareth took photos on his phone. Afterward, we ate cake and told stories about the past year, including some of the absurd things Robert had tried that seemed almost funny now from a safe distance. The celebration felt private and meaningful in a way our actual wedding hadn't been able to be with all the family drama hanging over it. Oliver's mother joined us for a quiet anniversary dinner the next evening at a restaurant near our house. She brought a photo album she'd made of pictures from our wedding day, carefully curated to include only the joyful moments without Robert or Blake in them. She'd chosen photos of Oliver and me laughing together and dancing and cutting the cake with genuine smiles on our faces. She said she wanted us to have memories of the happy parts of that day, without the painful parts intruding. Oliver flipped through the album slowly, and I watched his face soften as he looked at pictures of us that captured real joy, despite everything else happening. He thanked his mother and told her the album meant a lot because it showed she understood what we'd lost, and was trying to help us reclaim some happiness from that day. His mother reached across the table to squeeze both our hands and said she was proud of us for building something strong together. The dinner felt peaceful, and I left feeling grateful that Oliver's mother was genuinely trying to repair their relationship. Oliver's mother called again in September, sounding nervous about something she needed to tell us. She said Blake had gotten engaged to someone he met in rehab, and she wanted us to hear it from her instead of through family gossip. Oliver stayed quiet for a long moment before telling her he wished Blake well and hoped he'd genuinely changed. His mother asked if we'd want to attend the wedding whenever it happened, and Oliver gently said no, but that he hoped Blake found happiness. After hanging up, Oliver looked at me and said he meant what he told his mother about wishing Blake well. He said he hoped his brother had actually done the work to become a better person, but that he had no plans to put himself back in Blake's orbit to find out. I told him that was a healthy boundary, and that he could wish someone well from a distance, without owing them his presence or energy. I spent 3 days planning the menu and cleaning our house until Oliver made me stop because I was scrubbing the same counter for the 4th time. Thanksgiving morning arrived, and I arranged plates on our dining table while checking the turkey every 15 minutes, even though it had hours left to cook. My mom arrived first with 3 pies and immediately started helping in the kitchen without being asked. My dad and siblings showed up next carrying side dishes and wine, filling our small house with noise and laughter that made my chest feel warm. Oliver's mother came alone, holding a homemade stuffing casserole and looking nervous until my mom hugged her and pulled her into the kitchen. Oliver's aunt arrived with his 2 supportive cousins, the ones who'd cut contact with Robert after reading Oliver's email, and they brought flowers for the table. We squeezed 13 people around a table meant for 8, passing dishes and talking over each other in the best possible way. Nobody mentioned Robert or Blake, even though their absence hung in the air like smoke you could almost see. Oliver's mother laughed at my dad's terrible jokes, and his aunt told embarrassing stories about Oliver as a kid that made him turn red. My sister asked Oliver's cousin about her new job, and they talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. This was what family was supposed to feel like, I realized while watching everyone eat and smile. Safe and warm and uncomplicated. After dinner, we played board games in the living room, and Oliver's mother beat everyone at trivia, cackling when she got the final question right. Later that night, after everyone left, Oliver and I cleaned dishes together in comfortable silence. He told me this was the first Thanksgiving in years where he didn't feel tense waiting for his father to start something. December came fast with early darkness and cold rain that made me want to stay inside under blankets. Oliver and I decorated our house with lights and a small tree, creating traditions that belonged only to us. One evening while we hung ornaments, Oliver stopped and looked at me with this serious expression that made my stomach flip. He said the whole nightmare with his father had been horrible, but it taught him something crucial about prioritizing our partnership over family obligation. He explained that growing up he'd always tried to keep peace and make everyone happy, but watching Robert manipulate me showed him that sometimes you have to choose your spouse over your parents. His voice shook when he said we'd learn to face hard things together instead of avoiding conflict, and that made us stronger than couples who never had to fight for their relationship. I told him I agreed, even though the journey sucked while we were living through it. We hung the last ornament and stood back to look at our tree, just the two of us in our quiet house. Oliver's mother called in mid-December, asking if she could stop by with important news. She arrived looking lighter somehow, less tired around her eyes, and sat on our couch twisting her hands together. She said she'd finalized her divorce from Robert the previous week and signed papers for an apartment 3 miles from our house. Her voice was steady when she explained she wanted to rebuild relationships with family members who'd chosen boundaries over enabling Robert's behavior. She looked directly at me and apologized again for not protecting Oliver sooner, for staying silent when she should have spoken up. Oliver reached over and squeezed his mother's hand, telling her he was proud of her growth even though it came slower than he'd wanted. She asked if she could join us for Christmas and promised to respect whatever boundaries we needed. We said yes, cautiously, knowing trust would take time but willing to give her chances to prove she'd changed. After she left, Oliver admitted he felt hopeful about having his mother back in his life as long as she kept doing her own work. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow covering our yard in white that looked clean and new. We opened presents with just the two of us first, drinking coffee in our pajamas and laughing at silly gifts. Later, my family came over along with Oliver's mother, his aunt, and the supportive cousins who'd become our chosen family. We cooked together and ate too much and played music too loud. Oliver's mother brought photo albums from his childhood and told stories about him learning to walk and losing his first tooth. She didn't mention Blake or Robert once. That evening after everyone went home, I stood in our living room looking at the mess of wrapping paper and empty plates and felt something settle deep in my chest. We'd gotten exactly what we wanted when we started this journey, a marriage built on honesty and respect and genuine partnership. Robert's manipulation had failed completely because we chose each other and refused to accept anything less than real love. The path had been harder than I'd expected on that day Oliver proposed 3 years ago, but standing in our home surrounded by evidence of the family we'd built, I knew we were happier and stronger for having fought for what we deserved.